Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, these are the articles that I have chosen for today's discussion. But before we start, let me wish everyone a very happy Independence Day. As part of the Independence Day celebration, Unacademy is providing a special prize offer on our IAS subscription. The online English classroom program shall be available at just $24,999, and this shall be a comprehensive program covering your live classes, mentorship, one-on-one mentorship, doubt resolution support, and even your prelims and mains test series. So those interested can enroll by using the link provided in the description below. And also please note that tomorrow we won't be having the Hindu analysis. Tomorrow being a public holiday, there won't be a Hindu analysis on our YouTube channel. We'll come back on the 16th of August. So let's start the discussion today by looking at this column from page number 8. This column, written by Suhasini Heather, explores the recent changes that have happened in our immediate neighborhood. In the context of what has happened in Bangladesh, which we have covered in detail, Suhasini Heather is carrying out a much larger debate, a detailed analysis of what has happened in our neighborhood in the last few years and how adverse events have affected India's interests. How India has fallen short in its neighborhood diplomacy is the theme of this article. In fact, in the previous days, when we discussed the crisis in Bangladesh, I had explained how this regime change in Bangladesh represents a foreign policy failure on part of the Modi government. India clearly was caught on the back foot, as India largely stood on the sidelines when a regime change was underway in Bangladesh. Today, we barely have any contacts with the opposition, and we might even witness the rise of another anti-India government in our neighborhood. So, the writer is comparing these events with other similar events that have happened in our neighborhood in the recent years. And she points out the critical flaws in Indian diplomacy, especially when it comes to our immediate neighborhood, which is the South Asia region. Now, if you look at the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years, there have been some very adverse developments in our neighborhood. Starting in 2020-21, we saw the rise of a military regime in Myanmar, where elections were nullified by the military junta, and Myanmar's military brought back the junta rule, the military regime, by staging a military coup. Then within few months, India got a massive shock in Afghanistan when Taliban ran over the country. The friendly Afghan civilian government headed by then President Ashraf Ghani was thrown out and the Taliban captured power. So when these developments happened, India barely had any contact with the Taliban. India was not on talking terms with Taliban, as we had often treated Taliban as just a radical terrorist outfit. So India lost its influence in Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover, and it posed a detrimental threat to our security interests in the region. Then from 2022, we have seen many more such developments in our neighborhood. Look at Sri Lanka, for example, the economic crisis that hit the country and how the Rajapaksa brothers were thrown out of power. The Rajapaksa brothers were thrown out of power as they were held responsible for the economic crisis that had hit Sri Lanka. So again, a sudden regime change in another neighboring country. Then Pakistan was also not left behind. Pakistan is known to have gone through repeated incidents of political crisis. The Imran Khan government was toppled largely in an undemocratic manner, where the army and the ISI, the deep state, they would play a behind the scenes role in toppling Imran Khan's regime, and they have staged another round of elections which has been tightly controlled by the army and the ISI. Today you might have an elected government, a coalition government in Pakistan, but it's a well-known secret that the deep state largely controls the politics and the elections, and such regime changes, they have become quite common in our neighboring country, Pakistan. Similar adverse developments have been noted in Nepal, where coalition governments have fallen repeatedly in the last few months. We have been dealing with the Communist Party of Nepal, the UML faction, which is headed by KP Sharma Oli. So KP Oli is generally not seen as a pro-India leader. He has been known for taking anti-India stance during his previous terms as the Prime Minister of Nepal. Now the return of KP Oli as the leader of Nepal and the comeback of the Communist Party of Nepal, unified Marxist-Leninist faction, represents a concern for India. In Maldives as well, we have seen similar developments. The friendly government of Ibrahim Soleh was replaced by Mohammad Muizu's government in last year's elections. From 2018 to 2023, India had very good ties with Maldives because of Ibrahim Soleh being in power, who headed the Maldivian Democratic Party, which is seen as a pro-India party. But following last year's elections, Ibrahim Soleh lost the elections and Mohammad Muizu from the opposition rose to power, and immediately Mohammad Muizu has taken an anti-India position, which has affected our ties with Maldives. So all across our neighborhood, from Myanmar to Afghanistan to Sri Lanka to Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Maldives, so except for Bhutan, in every neighboring country, India's interests have been compromised severely because of these recent developments. So what has happened in Bangladesh represents yet another setback for India. You can't have such adverse developments happening in our neighborhood, and a large part of the blame lies on India for failing to protect its interests. If you look at what happened in Bangladesh, India never read the situation correctly, or even if we read the ground situation correctly, it was not acted upon by the government. See, Suhasini Haider is pointing out that we have a very big diplomatic presence in Bangladesh. We have a high commission in Dhaka. We have 4 consulates in Chittagong, in Sylhet and in 2 other places. Plus our intelligence agency RAW has a formidable presence in Bangladesh. And yet, India did not read the ground level situation. We failed to understand the pulse of the people of Bangladesh. Clearly, Sheikh Hasina had taken an authoritarian tilt in the last few years, and India should have noticed that, and if noticed, we should have put some pressure on Sheikh Hasina to scale back those tendencies. But India did not do that. Given that Sheikh Hasina was a good friend of India, India stood on the fence, on the sidelines, allowing Sheikh Hasina to run an authoritarian regime, which eventually became extremely unpopular. So this was further compounded, the problems were further compounded with the economic crisis that hit Bangladesh. So given this combination of political unpopularity and economic crisis, no wonder the people rebelled, especially the youth who were struggling to find jobs, and they toppled the regime and they threw out Sheikh Hasina from power. So this represents a clear failure on India's foreign policy, because either we didn't read the situation correctly, or we did and still we didn't act upon it. Ideally, India should have brought some pressure and influence on Sheikh Hasina to scale down the authoritarian tendencies. And at the same time, we should have built contacts with the opposition. Now, this has always been a problem for India. We always put our eggs in one basket, right? We just rely on one party, one leader in our neighborhood. And if that party is removed from power, or if that leader is replaced, then that is where we lose our influence in the country, in the neighboring countries. Now, if you look at the history of India-BNP relations, there is nothing positive over here. India has had a very cold relationship in the past with the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and being the main opposition, it should have deserved more attention from India. Whether you like it or not, you need to engage with all the stakeholders in other countries. That is how you can protect your interests. You need to be pragmatic. You can't just focus on idealism. You can't just see who will align with you. You need to work with everyone, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with their ideology or not. That is how foreign policy works. So experts and even the writer Suhasini Haider is pointing out that this is where India is losing out. We relied only on one party in Bangladesh, the Awami League, relied on one leader, Sheikh Hasina. Now that Sheikh Hasina is out and Awami League is out of power, we barely have any good relations with the BNP and the other opposition. this leaves India many steps behind the other powers in the region. If you look at China, Pakistan, even United States, they have other stakeholders to rely upon to protect their influence. But India is largely left with nobody. Ideally, we should have drawn this lesson few years ago from Afghanistan, when eventually we came around to deal with Taliban. For many decades, we had branded Taliban as just a terrorist outfit, given its anti-India position, given how Taliban had previously sheltered anti-India terrorist groups at the behest of Pakistan's ISI. So, as a result, we followed this idealistic approach that we shouldn't talk to Taliban, we shouldn't engage with Taliban, while every other country was striking deals with Taliban. From US to China to even Iran and Russia, they struck their own deals protecting their interests and influence. But India lost out when Taliban captured power in 2021, and it was only after the Taliban takeover that India reached out to Taliban. Now we have reversed our policy. We are in talks with Taliban. We are engaging with the Taliban regime to try and protect our interests in Afghanistan. But experts say that this is a little too late. Ideally, we should have engaged with the Taliban much before that, whether we like them or not, whether we are aligned with them or not. So the writer goes on to give such examples. Suhasini Haider is talking about how India has recently reached out to the JVP party in Sri Lanka, which is known for its anti-India position. Now that there is political and economic chaos in Sri Lanka, finally we have reached out to other parties as well, like the JVP. So these were lessons that we had already drawn. Ideally, we should have implemented this in Bangladesh. We should have put some pressure on Awami League, on Sheikh Hasina to scale down the authoritarian tendencies and even build contacts with Khaleda Zia, BNP and other opposition in Bangladesh, so that we would have leverage even if there is a change in government, even if a leader is removed from power. In Maldives, in Nepal, we have had many examples. Even in the past as well, if you go back in time, look at our neighborhood relations. This is one flaw, one mistake that India always makes. We end up relying heavily on one party and one leader. In South Asian politics, most leaders, they do, manage to make a comeback. Look at Nawaz Sharif. At one point, he was banished from the country, but he did make a comeback, and today his party is back in power. But doesn't mean you rely on just one party and one leader. You need to have contacts with different spectrums, different stakeholders on the political spectrum. Right? Maldives should have been a clear lesson for India. India could have easily convinced Mohammad Muizzu to work with India without allowing for any friction and tensions. But instead, what did we do? We had a short-sighted policy. We relied only on the Maldivian Democratic Party, Ibrahim Soleh, Mohammad Nasheed, the pro-India leaders and pro-India parties. So when these pro-India leaders and parties were removed from power, right, we had no other contacts left. Obviously, the opposition, which would have seen that India favors only one party and leader, when they come to power, they do display an anti-India stance. If India had engaged with the Maldivian opposition, reached out to Mohammad Muizzu before the elections, maybe things would have been different. In a way, we pushed them into the hands of China, and China leverages that to counter the Indian influence in our neighborhood. So these are key lessons that India needs to draw, because ensuring political stability is important in our neighborhood, and we should learn to deal with whoever comes to power in our neighboring countries. If we continue with this old world approach of having friendly ties with only one party, one leader, there will be such repeated instances where we will lose out, where our interests will be compromised. Look at United States or China, how they have occupied the space left behind by India. China, for that matter, has a very transactional relationship with every country, and it manages to work with all the stakeholders. And this happens to be a major setback, a major shortcoming of India's foreign policy, and that is the core argument being made by the writer. So what should India do? We should focus on engaging with all the political stakeholders in our neighboring countries. We can't afford to rely on just one party and one leader. We should engage with the opposition as well, so that tomorrow if there is an internal crisis and if the opposition comes to power, we should have good relations with the opposition and ensure that our interests are always protected, irrespective of the government, right? So this is a key lesson we need to draw, because there have been repeated back-to-back incidents in our neighborhood where our interests, our influence has been compromised. And the worst part is it's not happening for the first time. It's happened in the past as well. And apparently we haven't learnt any lessons over here. So that's why I feel this column is very important by Suhasini Heather. And let's see what kind of question can be asked based on this topic. India must learn lessons from the recent changes in most of its neighborhood. Elaborate. So it's a 15-mark question. You need to provide an elaborate explanation. So you can start your answer with a good introduction, talking about the significance of India's neighborhood. Mention why South Asia is very important to India, right? In maybe 1 or 2 lines, you can point out that we share land and maritime borders with these South Asian neighbors. So whatever adverse development happens here, from Afghanistan to Myanmar to Sri Lanka, it will directly impact India. It will affect our security and economic and political interests. So that way you are setting the context. You are explaining why the neighborhood is important. Then you can start out by explaining the recent turmoil seen in South Asia with examples. In one paragraph or maybe in a bullet point format, point out the various political situations that have developed from Myanmar to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives. Clearly mention those incidents. You don't have to write all the details. Just the country, the year, and maybe one line about what kind of turmoil was witnessed. So that way you are explaining the recent events, the changes that have happened in our neighborhood. Now discuss the impact. Discuss how this affects India. Give some examples. Point out how India had invested nearly $3 billion in Afghanistan. Now the investments are compromised. We are not sure whether Taliban would allow India to be involved in those projects. We are not sure whether our investments in Myanmar would be protected tomorrow if the military regime falls. We are not sure what will happen to our investments in Bangladesh given the change in regime. So clearly there is a huge impact, a big implication on India. So here you provide the analysis after this. Explain the shortcoming in our foreign policy. Point out that we have always been short-sighted. We have relied on one party, one leader, which often leads India to compromise its interest and influence when there is a change in government. Whenever such upheavals happen in our neighboring countries, we are caught on the back foot while others occupy that space left by India. China, US, Pakistan and others, they occupy that space created by India, leading to a setback for India. This results in the rise of anti-India governments and anti-India leaders that can compromise our security interests and strategic interests, right? And finally, provide a conclusion, a way forward. In the conclusion, you can mention what can India do. We should engage with all the stakeholders, even with the opposition. We need to be pragmatic in foreign policy, right? Whether we like them or not, whether we align with their ideology or not, doesn't matter. Be it a military regime in Myanmar, be it a radical extremist terror group like Taliban in Afghanistan, right? Or be it anti-India leaders like KP Oli, Mohammad Muizu. We have to engage with them. Be it the BNP, which has historically been pro-Pakistan, we need to engage with them, offer incentives to them, offer a friendly relationship through which they can benefit. So this engagement is necessary, this practical outlook is necessary in our foreign policy. So suggest this as a conclusion, as a way forward, and you can end your answer. Now let's look at the next article on page 10, a column related to the governance in Delhi. I'm sure all of you know Delhi is a union territory, and the governance of Delhi has always been a controversial point. It's been a point of friction between the union government and the state government, essentially the Delhi government. When I say state here, obviously it refers to the elected government of the union territory, right? In this context, the Delhi government, to be specific. So Delhi, despite being a union territory, it has an elected government with a legislative assembly of its own. So there has been constant friction with regard to the governance and administration of the Delhi region, the National Capital Territory region. And this has led to a political standoff between the center, the ruling party at the center, and the party which rules the Delhi government. So let's understand why the topic is in news and understand the background here first. Let's understand what is the governance structure in Delhi, what problems and issues have come up, and what can be done to provide for a smooth functioning of governance in Delhi. See, recently the Supreme Court has ruled that Lieutenant Governor can nominate few officials to the MCD, the Municipal Corporation of Delhi. And Lieutenant Governor can do this without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. See, generally if you look at state governments, where you have elected state governments, right, the governor of the state is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, headed by the Chief Minister. Governor is largely a nominal authority, except for few discretionary powers. But in the case of Delhi, the Lieutenant Governor gets a lot more powers than a regular governor of a state. So this ruling of the Supreme Court, that Lieutenant Governor can appoint 10 aldermen, 10 officials to MCD, which is the local authority, right? MCD looks after local governance, urban governance at the local level. So this power of the LG, which has been upheld by the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has said that LG can appoint these officials to the MCD without even consulting the Council of Ministers. This in a way undermines the elected government, the elected assembly of Delhi. This again brings back the topic of the union government versus the Delhi government. So let's quickly understand the background here. Now if you look at Delhi, you have the National Capital Territory covering large parts of New Delhi, then all the satellite towns from Gurgaon to Noida and others. So NCT is a very large area which is a union territory today, and you have New Delhi in the middle, modern New Delhi, which is the seat of power of the central government. It is the seat of power of the center. All the key central institutions are located here, including the Prime Minister's office, the Rashtrapati Bhavan, all the key ministries and even foreign embassies in Chanakyapuri. They are all based out of the national capital, New Delhi, right? And NCT, which refers to a larger geographical area, covers the other neighboring territories as well. So historically, if you go back in time, if you go back to India's independence post 1947, that too after the constitution was adopted, Delhi was listed as a Part C state in 1950. That was its constitutional status. It was listed as a Part C state. Then during the reorganization in 1956, when the States Reorganization Commission under Fazal Ali came out with its recommendations to reorganize India internally, Delhi was set up as a union territory. It was given the status of a union territory, but it would have its own elected assembly. It would be governed by an administrator, right? For local governance, an MCD was also established in 1958, which would look after local urban administration and governance. But eventually, Delhi got its own elected assembly. It would have an elected government in place. This was a result of the recommendations of the Balakrishnan Committee of 1989. After decades of direct rule by the center, given that this was the seat of power of the center was directly administering the region as it was a union territory governed by the administrator, by the Lieutenant Governor. But based on Balakrishnan Committee's recommendation, a constitutional amendment was carried out, the 69th Amendment in 1991, that provided for an elected assembly with a Council of Ministers to administer the NCT region, the National Capital Territory. So since then, Delhi has had an elected government where people vote for an elected assembly, and there is a Council of Ministers headed by the CM that is supposed to provide for administration and governance in the NCT region. Is this clear? But however, this amendment, which was done in 91, the 69th Constitutional Amendment, it set aside three important subjects: public order, land and police. Generally, these are state subjects. Maintaining law and order, policing and land. Generally, these are state subjects for every other state. But in the case of Delhi, they have been kept under the union government, under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Why? Because these are critical subjects, given that New Delhi especially is the seat of power of the center. It's critical for the central government to have control over law and order, police and land, where government institutions are present and foreign embassies are present. Because the central government has an obligation to protect the foreign embassies, their diplomatic missions, to secure the seat of power where the central government is based out of. That can't be given to a state level authority or a police authority which is basically under the the Delhi elected government. That can't be done. So these subjects, public order, policing and land, that's why Delhi police largely reports to the MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs. Right? So MHA gets control of public order, police and land, whereas the elected government through its Council of Ministers will look after other aspects of governance. For local administration, you have the Municipal Corporation, the MCD. So the Government of NCT of Delhi Act was brought out in 91 following these constitutional changes, and this provides the detailed provisions of the administration and governance of the Delhi region, the NCT, which is the National Capital Territory region. Now this provision, essentially this division of powers between the centre and the Delhi government, leads to a constant friction between centre and Delhi government, especially when there are opposition ruled governments. In the last few years, we have the BJP and its coalition in power at the centre, followed by the AAP, which has managed to win back-to-back elections in Delhi. So the political standoff between BJP and the AAP has directly affected the administration of the Delhi region. Delhi government has often pointed out that the Ministry of Home Affairs and the centre has crippled the Delhi's administration by misusing the office of the LG, the Lieutenant Governor. We have seen how several Delhi ministers, including the Chief Minister himself, have been arrested on various charges. It's been alleged that the centre has been misusing its powers and even not allowing a free hand for the Delhi government in areas where it's supposed to enjoy its powers and jurisdiction. So this has led to a frequent legal battle as well at the Supreme Court. There have been several amendments done to the NCT of Delhi Act. So as a result, the powers of the Delhi government have always been under question. It has been a point of friction, a source of friction between the centre and the Delhi government. Now let's look at the important cases and amendments which have had some serious implication on the powers of the elected government in Delhi. In 2016, we had a case, the government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India. In this case, the Delhi High Court essentially curtailed the powers of the elected government. It upheld the powers of the Lieutenant Governor, who basically works on behalf of the centre through the Ministry of Home Affairs, and appointed LG as the executive head. So this basically reduced the powers of the elected government. Now this was seen as unconstitutional and an appeal was filed against this. So the case reached the doorsteps of the Supreme Court. And in 2018, in the government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India, the Supreme Court essentially reversed the Delhi judgment. The Delhi High Court judgment was essentially reversed. The Supreme Court said that centre, yes, it will exercise power in Delhi only in 3 subjects: public order, police and land. But for every other aspect of governance and administration, the day-to-day governance of Delhi will be under the elected government. Or else what's the point of having elections? The Supreme Court spoke about the 3-chain accountability system, or the chain of accountability which is in place in our democracy. See, government officials who are supposed to do their work, who are supposed to provide for good governance, they are accountable to the Council of Ministers. Right? They are answerable to the ministers of the concerned ministries and departments. Council of Ministers are answerable collectively to the assembly from where they are elected. Right? They are accountable to the popular house, to the elected house, and the assembly collectively is accountable to the people. So people, they elect their representatives, their MLAs, their MPs, and essentially they will hold the executive accountable, the ministers accountable. They will hold the officers accountable. So this is how the chain of accountability works. The 3 steps of accountability. So Supreme Court restored this balance between the centre and the Delhi government by essentially reversing the judgment, restored the powers of the elected government, restricted the powers of the centre only to 3 subjects: public order, police and land. But to counter this, the centre brought out an amendment. In 2021, the government of NCT of Delhi Act was amended by the centre, which required the Council of Ministers to obtain the opinion of Lieutenant Governor before taking executive action on matters specified by the LG. Now let's say, based on orders from MHA, LG has said that with regard to policing, with regard to public order, or with the interest of the central government, these issues can't be touched. Those issues, right, they'll be out of bound for the Council of Ministers. They can't exercise their jurisdiction on these areas. If they want to exercise jurisdiction, they have to approach the LG for permission. Imagine an elected government approaching the LG, who's a nominal authority appointed with the centre, who's essentially an agent of the centre, asking for their approval and permission. This severely curtailed the powers of the elected Delhi government and enhanced the powers of the Lieutenant Governor. Basically, the powers of the centre was enhanced. This was again countered by the Supreme Court through a constitution bench. A constitution bench of the Supreme Court held that Delhi Assembly and government, they will have complete powers on all matters except for police, public order and land. Because the 69th Amendment Act, as recommended by Balakrishna Committee, was very clear that centre should have authority only on these subjects in order to ensure that the capital region is safe and secure, to protect the central institutions, the seat of power and the foreign embassies. Only for that reason, police, public order, land should be with the centre, with the MHA. Supreme Court reiterated this in this constitution bench verdict and restored the powers of the Delhi government, the elected Delhi government. But now this has again been countered through an amendment that was done last year. The Government of NCT of Delhi Act was again amended, where the National Capital Civil Service Authority, right, any transfers, postings of civil servants cannot be done by the Chief Minister anymore. The Chief Minister has to consult with a committee that includes the Chief Secretary and Home Secretary, who essentially report to the MHA. This curbs the powers of the Delhi Chief Minister to even transfer the officials. So if the CM has to consult the Chief Secretary and Home Secretary for postings, transfers and promotions and suspensions, then what authority will the elected government have on the officials? How can they ensure accountability? If you look at the chain of accountability, if the Council of Ministers, if they have to hold the officials accountable, they need to have full jurisdiction and control over them. But the CM, who is an elected CM of Delhi, right, the elected government doesn't even have the powers to transfer or determine the postings of officials, because this has to be done in consultation with the Chief Secretary and Home Secretary. Clear? So establishment of the National Capital Civil Service Authority through the latest amendment which was done has again curtailed the powers of the elected Delhi government. Now the Supreme Court has ruled that LG has the powers to appoint officials to the local body, MCD as well, and he need not be bound by the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Essentially, the elected government's powers have been further curtailed. So this is the concern which comes up. This is the criticism that comes up. So what can be done going forward? How can we ensure accountability? How can we ensure the distinct powers of Delhi government is protected from any overreach of the centre? The centre has a valid point. The centre needs control over certain subjects. But can this mean that the centre can meddle with the functioning of an elected government and an elected assembly? Then what's the point of having elections? Right? Now this is where we need to look at other examples from abroad. See, if you look at India, the NCT region is spread around 1450 square kilometers, which is a massive territory. So it's not just New Delhi, the capital that you're aware of, it includes Gurgaon, Noida and the other outskirts region as well. The actual capital, New Delhi, is just around 50 square kilometers, where all your central government offices and institutions and buildings are present. All the embassies, high commissions are present. This part of the capital, which is basically the national capital, it's just around 50 square kilometers. So this distinction has to be. Now if you look at Washington DC in the United States, right, DC is around 1 kilometers, which is seen as the capital district. So of course there is a separate administration, but outside of that, Washington has regular administration where the concerned local authorities, they exercise their own power, but only in the national capital the powers are restricted. The federal government has more control over security, law and order and land. Now such an arrangement is necessary in India as well. Only in New Delhi, maybe within a range of 50 to 75 square kilometers or maybe up to 100 square kilometers, only in this area the union government should be given control of public order, police and land. Outside of this, every other subject should be with the elected government. So inside New Delhi as well, elected government of Delhi should have complete powers except for 3 subjects. Center should be given control only on 3 subjects: public order, police and land, only for New Delhi region. Outside of it, the elected Delhi government and assembly should have complete control even on policing, public order and land. This is one of the suggestions, right, which can resolve this standoff so that we can ensure that there is a responsible government in Delhi, right. In order to ensure that the elected government is responsible, accountable, the protection of the powers of the Delhi government is very essential. So let's take a practice question here. Why is there constant tension and friction between the union government and the Delhi government? Examine in detail. So I hope based on what we have discussed, you should be able to write your answer. Let's see how many of you can write a good answer for this, and please post your answers in the comment section. I'll go through them later. So use the key points that we have discussed. Maybe start with the background, a brief background, and how center has control over some of these subjects, which leads to constant tension and friction. In the body, discuss the cases and amendments and how the power has swung between the elected government in Delhi and the Lieutenant Governor's office. Discuss the friction between center and the elected government in Delhi. Then finally, present a way forward, maybe draw a comparison with other global capitals as well, and suggest a solution that within New Delhi, center needs to have control on these 3 subjects. But this can be limited to maybe 50 to 100 square kilometers. And in every other aspect, in every other area, the elected government of Delhi should have the control. This will be a fair division of powers. It will ensure the sanctity of the center. It will protect the seat of power, right? And at the same time, it will ensure that we have a responsive government in Delhi, which can provide for better urban governance and administration on a day-to-day basis. So let's see if you can write this answer. Now coming to the prelim section, we have a couple of articles today. One, we have this article on the front page itself referring to the CRS, the Civil Registration System. This is a new online system which has been introduced to register every single birth and death that occurs in the country. I hope you know that every birth and death has to be registered with the concerned registrar. Previously, states would maintain their separate registrars. State governments were maintaining their separate registrars documenting the births and deaths, but largely this was done manually, and wherever digitization was introduced, it was not rolled out very well. So the format of the birth and death certificates, the way in which the process was handled, it would differ from state to state. So to bring uniformity into this critical step, because this is very crucial for administration, your every government service that you want to avail will depend on your birth certificate. Post your death, for your family members, your death certificate will be very critical, right? It's needed for various purposes. It's a proof of identity, a proof of documentation, from property settlement to distribution of the assets, to even availing essential services through the government, through private sector. Birth and death certificates are very crucial. So to streamline this entire process, last year, the Registration of Births and Deaths Act was amended by the center. Following the amendment, CRS has been made mandatory. CRS has been made mandatory. It's an online portal set up by the center under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So this online portal is now being rolled out across states. States are integrating their databases with the CRS portal, trying to document every birth and death occurring in the country, based on which birth and death certificates are issued. But however, according to the article, a number of technical glitches have come up in the online portal, which has affected the functioning of the system. The registration of birth and death has become very complicated because of the online portal, which is filled with technical issues. For example, at the state level, in places like Nagaland, Tamil Nadu and others, states have been trying to migrate to this online portal of the center. But during migration, they have lost a lot of data. There is a lot of mismatch in data as well, which has come up. Imagine if the details of the birth and death registry is incorrect. This is going to have a cascading effect on every other document and record that you are ever going to own. So mismatch has occurred in several names. There is a case of lost data as well while migrating from the previous state databases to the central online database. OTPs are not getting generated on time. Most of the times the portal throws an error message. At the state level, when the concerned registrars, when they open the portal to enter the documents, it throws an error page, and this is leading to frustration amongst the people. Many of you might have experienced this, right? In fact, with most government portals, the poor IT infrastructure which is on the back end leads to this poor user experience. So people are running from one office to another, going again and again to these registrar offices to get births and deaths registered. It has become a very cumbersome, very challenging process, a bureaucratic process, which has led to substantial delays and frustration as well amongst the public. And this has greater implications if the issues are not addressed. There are very critical technical issues, like for example, in the text box wherever the data has to be entered, there is a strict character limit of 100 words or something. You can't enter more than that. So this is creating some serious limitations on the ground. It again shows the poor design that has gone into this portal and the website which has been created. It's not backed by the required server capacity. It's not been well designed, and it's a very faulty portal leading to multiple technical glitches which has affected registration of births and deaths. Coming to the next article, on page 14, we have a security related topic. The DRDO has successfully conducted the test of a long range glide bomb called Gaurav. Long range glide bomb. Usually these are heavier bombs which can deliver 1000 kg payload over very large distances, and it's an air launched bomb essentially. So this was test fired at the integrated test range of DRDO in Odisha near the Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island, which is part of the Balsore district. You have a test range, the ITR, near Wheeler's Island, which is renamed as Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island. So this is the primary missile test range facility of DRDO. So this air launched long range glide bomb was launched from a Sukhoi 30 MKI, which is a mainstay of the Indian Air Force. So it fired a 1000 kg glide bomb which relies on a hybrid navigation system. See, glide bombs are very heavier, they can carry a bigger payload, but because of the glide feature, can you see the wing like structure here? So this allows the bomb to glide, maneuver, and you can precisely hit the target. You can feed in the coordinates, and by using satellite navigation, it relies on GPS data and as well as our indigenous satellite system, the INS, the Indian Navigation Satellite System, provides the navigational data and information which will allow the bomb to glide and navigate and maneuver to hit the target with great accuracy, with great precision. So this has been indigenously designed and developed by RCI, Research Center Imarat, Hyderabad, which is one of the units under the DRDO. It has been successfully tested, and we might see an induction of the Gaurav long range glide bomb into the Indian Air Force. Is that clear? It can deliver a very large payload. These are mega bombs which can cause significant damage, and because of its gliding feature, which makes use of hybrid satellite navigation, you can carefully maneuver the bomb and strike a target precisely even at very long range distances. See, first of all, it is air launched, it's fired through fighter jets, so that itself enhances the reach, and after it has been launched by the fighter jet, it can further glide. You can still maneuver and navigate this to reach the target, which significantly enhances the range of the bomb. That's why it's a long range glide bomb. So this is what we learned from today's newspaper. On this note, I would like to conclude the session for today. I hope you guys have understood everything, and if you like the session, do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button. That is it for today. We will see you on 16th of August, because as I told you, tomorrow is Independence Day. I wish everyone a very happy Independence Day, and I wish you use the day to motivate yourself to prepare for the civil services exam. So tomorrow being a public holiday on the account of 15th August, we won't be having the Hindu analysis tomorrow. So see you again on 16th August. Take care. Have a good day. Thanks for watching.